Welcome into the Otson Audibles podcast. I'm Matt Prame, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack on the show. Welcome to your Monday edition, and we've got a lot to go into on this show. First and foremost, want to remind you guys, hey, 60% off an annual membership right now. That is only going to be alive for a couple more days. Make sure you jump in on that right now. 60% off for the rest for the next year, and you get this signing day, you get spring football, you get summer recruiting, you get football season, you get the early signing period, you get the start of the basketball seasons for both men and women, and you almost get all of the lead up to next signing day. Don't know what more you would need to know if you're on the fence of subscribing to duckterritory.com. Do it right now. All right, we're going to discuss two commitments over the weekend. We're going to have their final recruiting weekend before National Signing Day on February 2nd, and it produced a couple verbal commitments from some transfers, maybe some players we weren't necessarily 100% certain would happen. Two guys that there was very little build up to this coming into the weekend, and yet here we are, Oregon landing a transfer kicker, which is a surprise. Andrew Boyle, previously at Washington State, and then Jordan Riley, a defensive tackle, previously from Nebraska, have both joined the Oregon Ducks.
The Boyle one is interesting to me because I'm trying to figure out how this fits kind of with what you have in place already, because Camden Lewis was just voted second team all conference as a place kicker. He's got, I mean, if he wants, I think 3 more years of eligibility based upon the COVID year. Maybe this is a punter. Maybe this is a replacement for Tom Snee down the line. I don't know if that's clear. Sort of just an interesting special teams addition. I'm always curious to kind of see why you make additions like that. Obviously having, people are still really high on Henry Cattleman, who's with the Ducks as far as we know right now as well. So sort of an interesting addition to go snag a place kicker. Be curious to see kind of how he fits in terms of maybe he's got a strong enough leg where he can be the kickoff specialist. That was an area Oregon struggled with in 2021. And maybe they're kind of getting into the minutia of things going, we need to find someone who can help us with field position by booting it into the end zone or pinning them deeper. Because that was a shortcoming. Lewis was great on extra points. He was great on field goals. Again, was all conference second team voted by the coaches, but kickoff stuff, I mean, he wasn't even kicking off in the Alamo Bowl. They turned that over to Will Hutchinson. So that might be part of the angle there. And I think I've seen some sort of uncertainty and maybe some criticism of adding Jordan Riley, the interior lineman from Nebraska, based upon his statistical breakdown. I mean, he hasn't done a ton statistically, wasn't a starter at Nebraska. A couple of thoughts here. Oregon needs size and bodies. It doesn't hurt. Kid's 330 pounds. I mean, that's a large man. And Oregon, I think, has some great interior linemen now, but the future, maybe this is a play to kind of extend some of that. I don't know. The other part is Tony Tuioti. This is a player he recruited at Nebraska, coached for 2 years at Nebraska. Clearly the player he likes, and I'm going to just assume and trust that he has a good feel for how this fit works, because I do think, similar to Boyle, like both of these on paper are a little bit, I don't know, perplexing, a little surprising. Neither position totally felt like a position of need coming into this, and neither player really has the requisite experience where you go like, oh, you had to take that guy. I mean, Boyle, I think, is 0 for 1 on field goals in his career, and Riley has like 14 career tackles between 2 different D1 schools. So interesting additions. Be curious to hear more from Dan Lanning, who we will get to speak with on Wednesday for signing day. I'd imagine we'll talk a little portal stuff because there's been some movement since we spoke with him last. I don't know. Interesting moves. I think, I don't know. Jared, do you have more to add? I think the Riley one in particular, I'm kind of like, physically you get the size part of it, but the production hasn't been great. And I thought Oregon was pretty short up in the middle.
Yeah, I think both of them were interesting moves. Certainly something that I don't think any of us expected in terms of where they hit in the transfer portal. The Jordan, he's 6'6", 310 is his listed weight in Nebraska. That's a big body. I kind of look at that as replacing Jason Jones in terms of just like the pure size factor in this defensive line. Yeah, Oregon's defense, the interior on their defensive line is pretty short up with Popo and Brandon Dorless and Sam Taimani, which was the transfer from Washington. All those guys are kind of like the same size, same weight, like that 6'2", 6'3" to 300 pounds. This just is a completely different body than I think that Oregon has on the roster. The production certainly hasn't been there. I feel like both of these could be listed under the confidence in the staff type picks, because I can't justify either of them. You just kind of have to, hope and trust the staff and what they saw on tape with Tuioti and how he coached him at Nebraska. Maybe he saw something there. I do know Nebraska's defensive line was pretty good this past season and has a lot of guys on there. So maybe that was an issue where he just wasn't going to get playing time in general. But he's coming to Oregon where the interior defensive line is pretty stacked as well. So I don't really know. For Boyle, the place kicker, I think he's really honestly just going to be a kickoff specialist. That was his brief role at Washington State last year. 7 total kickoffs, 4 of them were touchbacks. It's been talked about a lot on this podcast in terms of the special teams disasters at points with Oregon's kickoff specialist or kickoff team. And, kicking the ball through the end zone eliminates that. And so maybe that's what Oregon is going after here. I think that's why Will Hutchinson, like you mentioned, Eric, was the kickoff specialist in the Alamo Bowl. It's interesting because Boyle is also a full scholarship guy. So that's another scholarship essentially it will use. I was going to say down the drain, but that's pretty mean. It's another one that's being used right now. And, that was surprising to me because Oregon doesn't have a lot of scholarships to kind of just use right now, to kind of move around and to use one on a kickoff specialist is perplexing. He certainly has the boot. If you go through his Twitter, he's got him kicking a 72-yard field goal, which is great. It shows off his leg strength, but it's, there's nobody else around in the stadium. It's just on a field. And he certainly has the leg power to do it. This is just, I think both of these moves are the staff asking you to trust them and what they're looking at and what they've seen and what they've looked at on film and all that good stuff, who they've talked to. Unless they're expecting some attrition, which we may learn about in the next couple of days, who knows? It just certainly wasn't the names you expected to pop up in terms of committing to Oregon after this weekend and who they brought on to campus.
I think Jordan Riley's addition I'm the opposite. I think it makes 100% sense. And it is worth taking and doing if I'm Dan Lanning in Oregon, because they don't have a guy on this team that's besides Popo that's this big. And so now you have 2 of them. It kind of replaces the Jason Jones role. And secondly, Jordan Riley will be gone after the 2022 football season. He will have graduated. He will have 0 years of eligibility left. And so basically I think this is, hey, do we want to go out and do we want to add a fringe Pac-12 caliber player that we'll have on our roster for 3 to 5 years because we personally can't push him out. We can over-recruit him, but it's not guaranteed he's going to leave. And we're not sure if this player is going to even be good enough for this level. Or we could go find somebody that can give us 10 snaps a game. And while he's not going to be a superstar player, he can at least give us some depth. He can give us some solid production when we need it. And we'll save that scholarship and roll it over into 2023 where we can go out and land a bigger name from the high school ranks instead of in 2022. So I think this is the Jason Caliste. That's maybe not the best example. Mikael McIntosh. Eric, who is the post that Oregon brought in? Is it Hosendove?
Yeah.
From the women's team. Like this is that, but for football, where you're going in and you're finding a player that's going to have 1 year of eligibility. They're going to play 10 to 15 minutes. If an injury pops up, you've got an experienced player ready to fill in, and then you roll the scholarship over one more year. Like this, there's zero risk in my eyes for Jordan Riley. The Boyle one, though, like you guys have said, is interesting because Cam is legit, was good in 2021. Outside of 2 games against Utah, he was really good. And but like Eric mentioned, the kicking thing, and I do think Washington State also had him as a punter too. So maybe this is some insurance if Tom Snee elects to go pro after this coming season, which I think could be a real possibility because he's pretty good and he would be a 6th-year senior in 2023, and maybe he just doesn't want to do the college grind again of college athletics for a 6th year. I think that's something that a lot of people don't kind of factor in here. So maybe the Boyle one is a safety net in case Tom Snee goes pro, and maybe even Camden Lewis would fit that notion for 2023. I don't know, but that one's the one for me where it feels a little more perplexing that they would do this, but certainly they've got our reasons for it, and they've got 2 elite special teams coaches on this roster that know what they're doing and felt like they needed to add another kicker.
So I'm going to go out of order here with the questions because this next one kind of fits the topic we're discussing right now, and it's from KG Amlin. When a team signs more recruits or transfers than spots available, it is said that it is because of expected attrition and spots that will open up. However, is that, quote, forced attrition or, quote, hopeful attrition, #odds and audibles? I thought we'd go here because we were just talking about some of the scholarship math Oregon has to deal with and kind of trying to figure out how some of this works. I think forced is a really strong term, but it's more like a discussion is had about potential playing time and kind of what's best for both parties. It's like almost a mutual separation kind of thing, if you want to use a dating analogy, I guess, where both parties kind of recognize like, hey, we can stick it out, but you're probably not going to enjoy it as much as you would like because you might not play very much. And if you go somewhere else, maybe you'd have a better opportunity. And for us, I mean, I don't think they're going to force is, you can't cancel scholarships. You can't just tell a kid you don't have a scholarship, get out. That's not how this works. But there are certainly, conversations behind the scenes kind of about viability of playing time, about fit, schematically, you're looking at new coaches that come in and maybe they see a player who was a good fit with the previous staff, but maybe not as good of a fit with the current kind of idea of how they want to approach things on either side of the ball. So I think it's in between forced and hopeful. Forced is too strong. Hopeful is like suggesting there's no conversations had and they're just kind of crossing fingers like, oh, I hope somebody leaves at this position group because what could we use another body at a different group? I don't think that's not how it works either. But unless you guys disagree, like I don't think Dan Lanning has sat down with any of the players who've left the program and been like, hey, sorry, man, like you don't have a spot here. It's, I think, more nuanced than that. It's, hey, if we're being realistic, you're 4th or 5th on the depth chart. You want to stick it out and try to improve that spot, that's great, but that's kind of where things are at, quote unquote. So, and maybe it's not even that forceful because you're talking about a staff that's coming in now without having seen these players in practice and being able to make those assessments. So maybe it's a little bit less hands-on in terms of where they are on the depth chart, kind of playing time related and maybe just fit in other ways. But yeah, it's between forced and hopeful.
Yeah, definitely between forced and hopeful. I'm sure that the forced transfers have happened at some point over the country and over at other schools. I mean, I'm sure it happens. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's pretty slimy to kind of force somebody out, but it happens. But these are just situations where I'm sure Lanning or whoever the position coach is just as Eric talked about, or they kind of say, you're way down the depth chart. You've got a lot of guys in your position coming through. You can stick it out and ride the pine all year and work hard and maybe get 6 snaps in an entire season, or you can transfer to Western Kentucky or something like that and get a chance to go play. And I think a lot of kids would choose that. A lot of players would go out and choose the path to where they can play the most, just because why wouldn't you? This is like, when you play sports, your whole goal is to go and try to play as much as you can. And just because either A, you want to get yourself shown when you hit the collegiate level, or you just want to go have fun when you're playing at a different level in sports when you're younger. And so, and nowadays it's a little different in terms of the transfer portal, where there can be financial implications as well. It's like if I'm an out-of-state recruit and I go back home, and my local sandwich shop is going to give me a couple grand to go and advertise their sandwiches, and I don't get anything out here. That might be an implication or something like that. But I agree with you, Eric. For the players who have transferred out of Oregon so far this season, I don't think any of them were forced. I don't think Dan Lanning or their position coach had a conversation really where they're like, well, you're pretty down on the depth charts, you might want to get out of here. I think those were all looking for the best in their own right. Maybe somebody like Robbie Ashford took it where he's really down on the depth chart because they bring in Bo Nix and they still return Ty and Butterfield. But even still, like he had the chance to showcase himself and go and try to become somebody who can compete with a starter. But that opportunity is significantly tougher here at Oregon than it is at Auburn. And so he made the personal decision to go do that. And he made the personal decision to go back home to Alabama. I think there's a whole lot of details that go into everybody's transfer. I don't think it's as simple as, I don't really like it here, I'm out. It can be, but I think more often than not, it's a pretty tough decision. And you look at Oregon's transfers, and some of them have certainly caused some issues within the fan base. At the end of the day, I think every player just does what's best for them. And whether that's playing time, whether that's moving back home, I don't see any problems with it. That's just how it is. And I don't think Oregon staff is hopeful that anybody transfers, because you're just losing talent when you get to Oregon's level. Sure, I think there are moments where they think that it could be nice if they didn't have X amount of players at what position, but you work with what you have. You can't really force them to go. You can develop them and then turn them into something before another school does, and I think that's what Oregon's going to try to do.
Yeah, it's a case where it never really happens this way. Like maybe in the South and the SEC, when the NCAA did allow 1-year scholarships, that did happen, where it was, hey, we're choosing not to renew your scholarship. You're going to have to go somewhere else. But that does not happen anymore. But I think it's pretty clear, like when the coaching staff sits down with a player and says, hey, like, we love you as a person. We really appreciate everything you've given to this program. But it's just not clicking. And we're bringing in some guys, and we're just being real with you because we think you want the truth. It's a hard time for you to play here, and you're welcome to stay. You're a model citizen. You're a good student. You represent the program well, but you're just not going to play. And if that's okay with you, that's okay with us. But if you want to play, it's not going to be here. We'll help you find somewhere else to go. That's usually how those conversations happen when Oregon oversigns, or when any school oversigns. And typically the athlete, because any athlete will know they want to play. And when it becomes clear that they're not going to see the field at all and they're running out of time, they're going to find somewhere else. And things kind of just figure themselves out.
Next one here from @Nash_Duccaneer, where we were supposed to start the show, but I decided to shuffle the deck. Out of all the football recruits that were visiting Eugene over the weekend, which ones do you see as the most likely to sign with Oregon in the future? And he writes in parentheses, on Wednesday and beyond. #OddsAndAudibles. Thanks for using the hashtag, by the way. I believe perfect 5 for 5 for this show with using the hashtag. So love to see that. Makes it easier for me. And actually, some of these I did pull from prior prompts. So having the hashtag made it easier to find that. So if you do want your questions read on the show and answered, that's the best way to get it, I guess, to reach us. Matt, I'm going to throw it more to you here just because your focus is recruiting. We talked on, it was Friday's show about the visitors. I think we've explained who's here. We're talking about signing on Wednesday first, maybe, and then maybe we can get in. I think the second part's hard if we're talking and beyond. We're talking about 23 and 24 kids who are just starting their recruitment. But I think we have a pretty good idea of, over the next 48 hours, which guys were here we expect to sign. We should note a lot of the players that already signed with Oregon were also here, so they've already signed. But who are some names that you're pretty confident?
Well, I think I'm pretty confident with Jaleel Florence, who, depending upon when you listen to this show, will have made his decision. I think it's going to be Oregon. I would be pretty shocked if it's not Oregon. He was here this weekend. I think Amarion Winston's probably another one that's probably trending towards Oregon's way. The last two that that we have on campus for official visits in 2022, Arliss Boardingham and Dave Iluli. I think both of these could go either way. Boardingham to Florida, if it's not Oregon. Iluli to Miami, if it's not Oregon. But I mentioned it on the site over the weekend. Distance from home. Like, typically, these are deals where towards the end of the year, towards the end of the stretch run, distance from home kind of catches up and nips one or two off Oregon's projected board. This might be the opposite for Oregon. It might help Oregon land one of or both of these guys. As, hey, do you really want to sign somewhere 3,000 miles away and go and play football somewhere so far away? Now, for Iluli, he's committed to the Miami staff previously when they were at Oregon, so there is that familiarity with the coaches at least. But we'll see what happens with those two. I'm not definitive one way or the other. I said going into the weekend that Oregon was probably having to make up some ground. They certainly have done that, and it's now kind of a any man's game type of a deal between those two recruits. Beyond that, I think Oregon is in a really, really good place with Miles Lockhart, a 2024 athlete out of Arizona. Jackson Bowers, a 2023 tight end, has told me that Oregon is definitely going to be one of the schools that he seriously considers down the road for possible commitments, and it lived up to expectations. And then, I don't know how if you were on social media and you were watching Nico's dad, 5-star quarterback, if you were watching his dad on social media, that family was in heaven at Oregon this weekend. They were here 3 days. I think they literally were on campus with the coaches, like, until there was a minute left of the live period, and they left. They literally used every second that was available to them to be with the staff. And while I'm not saying they're going to land them, top 5 player in the country, they certainly set the bar high for anyone else to come out and try and impress him.
I think the thing that works in Oregon's favor there is USC is probably Oregon's biggest competition for a quarterback recruit, and they've already got theirs.
Yeah.
And in Southern California, USC is really hard to pull top players, but especially quarterbacks. You go through their history. I know it's like every year they've got 2 or 3 5-stars at quarterback. And I think Nico's not going to go to USC. And if that's the case and he stays out west, Oregon certainly gave him a lot and his family a lot to think about this last weekend. I'll put it that way. Like Matt, I'm not going to sit here and say I expect him to sign, which is why I was kind of like, I don't know if we want to do beyond because it's so early. But you have to feel good, as Matt said, if you've been through social. I mean, this was a fun weekend, by the way. I'll just say, a digression. Just on social media, you got I get a pretty good feel for Dan Lanning. I know it's like pretty preliminary, but like there was some really fun content being thrown out there, whether it be videos or photos and kind of what they were doing behind the scenes. Unique. Social media, I think there's some pros and cons. We don't have to get into the cons, but one of the pros this last weekend was just, as people who don't or never been a part of a recruiting process, right? Like, I can't speak for you two, but I was never recruited to play college. Jared, you were a little bit for college baseball, we should know. A little bit, right?
Like very little.
So maybe you understand it a little bit better. But it was fun to kind of
not
see.
At all. Compared to Oregon recruits, no, not at all.
Okay, Jared was not recruited. He was terrible at baseball. Shame on me for compliment.
Yeah.
But my point was that I was getting, it was just like, it was fun kind of seeing how some of this comes together, kind of the events you attend, how you spend your time, and seeing a lot of it documented by tons of recruits who are here from all over the country. I came away kind of being like, this was the first opportunity for us to really kind of see, I know we're not getting the whole picture, but get a decent picture of what Dan Lanning at work looks like. And I came away really impressed. Obviously, again, it's very much surface information. We're seeing photos, brief videos. He did speak at the men's basketball game on Saturday night. By the way, announced the spring game, April 23rd, 1 p.m. Be there. That was his message. But I think just in general with Lanning, just some of the stuff on social, and the rest of the staff too, it's hard to come away feeling anything but kind of optimism for the way he seems to approach things on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, I'll just touch on what Eric was going off right there. It's really hard to not be optimistic in terms of how Lanning and the staff goes. Last week they brought in a bunch of recruits as well, a lot of high profile guys. Talked to a few of them, and they just were really glowing about the review. They talked about how Lanning and staff made everything personal. It never felt like they were just whoever it was I was talking to. It never just felt like they were just part of the group. It was whatever, like, hey, thanks for coming, we're glad you're here. It was like whether it was a position coach, head coach in Lanning, or just an offensive analyst, someone like that. They made every recruit seem special, feel special, get treatment just like they would in this time around too, this weekend. It's super optimistic to see how Lanning is going about this and how the rest of the staff is going about this. It's also very optimistic to see the types of players that they have gotten on campus this early in the stage in their tenures at Oregon. To get Nico Amawavai, it's definitely not how you say it, but we're going to try to get him a top 5 kid or top 10 kid into the discussion this early and get him on campus, get him to meet with Kenny Dillingham. And that's impressive. That's really important in terms of going forward. And we've talked about this on this podcast before, but getting a big time quarterback to commit early in your class kind of helps shape the rest of that class. And again, not saying they're going to get Nico or anything like that, but the fact that they're going after those big fish is really important. And the kid out of Southern California too, just like Eric was mentioning, and how USC usually controls that area of the world in terms of quarterback production. It will be interesting to see what they do. Slight digression. It will be interesting to see what they do with their quarterback commits in the next couple of years. If Caleb Williams comes to town, because he'll be there another 2 years, because he was just a freshman last year at Oklahoma. Yeah. So that's a lot of time for somebody to wait behind him. You kind of saw that with Justin Fields at Georgia, even though I think it was just a year. I don't remember off the top of my head. But I digress again. In terms of who could be signing on Wednesday, I heard Matt talk about how he feels confident in Jaleel Florence. Jordan James has been running back out of Tennessee. Current Georgia commit has been trending to Oregon in the 24/7 Sports Crystal Ball category. He's a name to watch. He would be pretty important considering that Oregon loses Travis Dye and Trey Benson to the portal. Don't get Jarek Broussard, who ends up committing to Michigan State over the weekend. Running back depth will be really important, and a player of his caliber will certainly come in and help. Amarion Winston would be fun, former Oregon commit. Lamar Winston's younger brother. He's been an Oregon commit for a very long time. He's certainly still in contact with all the Oregon coaches. I believe he was there this past weekend. Trajan Williams is a guy who hasn't signed but is still committed to Oregon. I think that should be somebody to look forward to or look for in terms of signing day potential. I think it'll turn out to be a good signing day for Oregon, especially considering where they were and where they have come up from. Obviously, it won't be as exciting as it might have been in the middle of September in terms of potential, but that's just kind of what happens. I mean, we've talked about that a lot on this podcast before. This is with their backs against the wall and very little time. Oregon's new staff has been able to, bring some big names into the fold in terms of who they sign. So, and we'll have more about that on later, even just today, in Jaleel Florence's commitment.
And I want to note just really quickly, talking ceiling with the signing class, because I did a story last weekend about it. Even though it's a class that will be 14 to 16 players, it still projects to be somewhere in like the 25 to 40 range from a national rankings perspective. So obviously not top 10, top 12, which was a streak Oregon was on recently under Mario Cristobal, of just kind of signing a top 10, top 12 class. You'll see that broken this year, but on a by commitment, by signee perspective, it's still a very respectable class. If you sign roughly half the number of recruits that some schools are going to sign when this is all said and done, and you're still kind of in that fringe, borderline top 25, they'll probably be outside the top 25, but somewhere in the high 20s to high 30 range, depending on how all this plays out. All right, next one from @PrincePuddles. What programs, if any, will Dan Lanning continue with Oregon, such as the SNL camp, fourth quarter fitness program, multiple jersey combos, all of which seem to yield lots of success in the past? And they also asked, what kind of new things could we maybe see him bring from Georgia? And he finished with #AtsAnAudibles. So appreciate that. Well, he'll pronounce the word program differently. That's one thing from Georgia to bring program. Which I think was already, by the way, on ESPN's broadcast when Dan Lanning came and spoke quite briefly with the ESPN crew. The whiteboard from the pit crew behind him was simply program.
That was fantastic.
I love that. That's already kind of being kind of a definitive, like, defining characteristic of Dan. That's kind of a joke there, but also true. I'll get to the first part before we jump to the Georgia stuff. SNL camp, I expect. I think all the things he brought up here, that Prince brought up, I think are things that'll continue, but just maybe under different names. I expect they will have some sort of summer showcase. This is, by the way, not only a thing Oregon has done. Other schools have done, quote unquote, something similar to an SNL camp for years. Oregon didn't even innovate that. Willie Taggart brought that from the Southeast to Eugene. So I expect we'll see some sort of summer camp where you have a bunch of top recruits come out and get them on campus. And I think that'll be a thing that continues, probably under a different name, or maybe for continuity's sake. Maybe Dan says, hey, let's keep the name because it was a thing people knew. I don't know if it's that big of a deal. Fourth quarter program, they're going to keep working out. I think they're going to keep doing conditioning during the summer. The name will certainly be different. We'll leave that to Wilson Love, but I don't anticipate you move away at all from that. And I'm guessing the retention of Mark Davis and Shad Williams, two previous assistant strength and conditioning coaches, will play a role in terms of some continuity between the previous program to this one, with obviously some adjustments made by the new hires. You have a new head strength coach. So I don't think you're seeing that go away. Obviously, clearly you're going to continue to work out. It'd be disastrous if it showed. Yeah, actually, Wilson Love hasn't been doing any strength conditioning
No.
the whole summer, just talking football and playing Madden, and here we are. We're ready. No, they'll, and I know I'm being a little bit. I'm not trying to be reductive to the question, but I just sort of a humorous, I guess, flip on that. And then the multiple jersey combos. That's I think that's ingrained in Oregon's culture. That preceded Mario Cristobal. That preceded his predecessors. Oregon's been doing multiple jerseys since I was in Matt? We're middle school, high school. Multiple jerseys have been going on. I mean, I think this isn't going away. In fact, I'd be surprised. I mean, every time you have a kid come on campus, they talk about how fun the jersey photo shoot was, and in part that's because you've got 8 different lids and 5 different. I don't even know how many combos there are at this point, but you've got different combinations. So I think those will all stay the same. Although, as those listening know, I am not a jersey head, so I don't know details of any of the jersey stuff.
There's too many to keep track of, but I think, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong. This is a little bit down the tangent here, but I think the first game in which Oregon broke out the different colored uniform away from their traditional greens at home, white on the road. I think it was the yellow uniforms in 2002 when they opened the year at Mississippi State on ESPN. I think that's at least my recollection.
that sounds really right to me, and that's 20 years ago, which is kind of absurd to say.
I just remember that game. It was
I think
one
you're
in
right.
which, like, or maybe it wasn't 2002 because that was that they played Mississippi State at home that year. Maybe it was 2003. I just Googled it. I really want to see, like, yeah, I'm looking at the highlights of that game, and Oregon is wearing all yellow. I don't know if they wore yellow in 2022 or not, but they may have, because that was a new uniform. That was a year where they broke out new uniforms. But I think you're right. It's been almost 20 years since they've done it. That's not changing. That's who Oregon is. That, like, their tradition is not having ties to a tradition and always changing things up.
Yeah. Anything else from the previous stuff we were talking about? I mean, I think we agree that fourth quarter obviously sticks around under a different name, and I think we even mentioned SNL camp is something we expect will take place, but probably under a different name too, right?
Yeah, I'd hope so.
Like the fourth quarter program is an Alabama thing that Feld brought from Alabama originally, or Cristobal wanted to bring from Alabama. Wilson Love coached at Alabama too, so just as Feld did. So it might come with a different name, but the genesis and the foundation of it will be very similar.
Yeah, I would be stunned if any of these things went away, especially something like the fourth quarter program, which is honestly really instrumentally changed how Oregon has performed in the last couple of years compared to where they were, like with Willie Taggart and Helfrich. Just a completely different way of shaping players' bodies, and it's clearly paid a lot of dividends. I know there was a lot of heat this year with Aaron Feld and all the injuries, but guess what? That wasn't because of the fourth quarter program, because it would happen every single year at Alabama or Georgia or whoever else has adopted that weightlifting strategy. I pray to God they change Saturday Night Live in the name. But other than that, I think that they will certainly continue to have an event like this. That's something that teams do across the country. It's a surefire way to potentially land some recruits. It's a surefire way to get some people thinking about Oregon. It's a surefire way to get players who are 2 or 3 years down the road to think about Oregon. I mean, I still remember in 2019, Dante Thornton Jr. coming to Oregon Saturday Night Live and just being an absolute stud. And everybody was kind of like, who's that kid in the orange cleats? And he was a beast. And here we are, a couple of years down the road, he's on the Ducks. That's why you have those camps. Jerseys, this is Oregon. This is what they do. It's not the best thing for a program to be known for just their jerseys and what they wear on the field if they don't actually perform. However, it has helped them in the past. It will continue to help them. And I would expect, here's my hot take, I would expect many more jersey combinations and all that stuff for this next year, because seemingly Mario put the kibosh on how often Oregon would have a jersey that doesn't include green or yellow as the primary color. I think Lanning and the younger staff might have a little bit more fun with it. Granted, I don't know how much the coaches actually have a say in what the jerseys look like, but I do remember something about Mario saying like, "Oh, we're going to do more traditional colors this year," and then that was it. It was just green and yellow the entire time, which is fine. I don't have any problems with that. And the ice or the stormtrooper look whenever they're on the road. But that's not changing. It's just going to be Oregon's tradition until I don't know when. Until we probably won't be talking about this much longer.
Jared, that wasn't the most hot take-ish thing you said during that discussion. Your hot take was you don't like Saturday Night Live? You don't like the name?
Oh, I think it's stupid. It's the middle of July. They can't call it something else. They couldn't be original and come up with anything. They had to call it Saturday Night Live. I mean, think of all the other options.
I'm not totally disagreeing with you.
The only good thing is I get to make my Twitter joke where it's like, we're live. It's, Saturday night, we're live. And some stupid thing like that, and I get reprimanded on Twitter for it. But Still worth it.
In terms of additions, this is such a small thing, but I brought this up a couple of days ago, and I don't know if it's like even all that much worth bringing up, but I'm going to, because why not? I've noticed just a change in graphics, and then this isn't necessarily brought from Georgia, but I mentioned this a couple of days ago. Like when like the Oregon football Twitter account has sent out happy birthday wishes. It's such a small thing. I noticed that they've been using the Nike Just Do It logo, and I think because of NIL, I think Oregon needs to embrace being Nike U a little bit, and I think you're starting to see that. And I don't necessarily know what. I'm not sure how involved Dan has been in this. I will say I know from talking with people that Mark Griswold was quite involved with graphics. I think he basically required final say before anything was sent out through social media. I don't know if Lanning will have as much involvement there. I wouldn't be surprised. I'd be surprised. I think it's probably like more like a Marshall Malkow is going to be more involved in that kind of thing. But I bring that up because I do think because of NIL and because of Oregon's obvious relationship with the largest, sports apparel outfitter in the world, that there is a lot of benefits to that relationship. And even if it's as simple as including it on a graphic on social media, I think there's value to that. But that's a really small thing. And I don't know if I have much more in terms of what he'll bring from Georgia as opposed from kind of like, I guess, big picture kind of, I don't know, I guess philosophical things that he's brought from Georgia and Alabama, which I don't know if that's even that specific to bring up. Do you guys have anything else from Georgia specifically? I couldn't really think of anything.
No. Like, I don't know. The band learns a new song, but, I can feel a little at home for Dan.
He will bring a better understanding of the Bulldog offense and defense when they play them to start the 2022 season. So there's another thing, but I don't know if culturally I could point to like, hey, here's a thing I think is coming. All right, we've got a couple more here from @Robbie Parness. The O-line is deep this year, but with almost every starter leaving after the season, how do you feel about the depth for the future? Will this be an important position to recruit for this upcoming cycle, or do we think of all the replacements already being on the roster? #Odds and Audibles. I thought a good question. We haven't really talked offensive line much because as he's established here, we've kind of been able to say, oh, they're set. They bring all their starters back. We think it's a good group. There's a lot of continuity. There's like no turnover really, besides George Moore not being here for the first time since I think Obama was president. But it's one of those things where I don't think we've talked a lot about the offensive line big picture, and I think it's worth having a quick discussion now on it. I do think the 2023 cycle. I think 2022, if Josh Connerly is a player you can add, would be massive. Because I do think, with the exception of like Jackson Powers Johnson and Dawson Jaramillo, none of the players that we expect to be on the 2023 roster have really played much. I think you can pencil in those two as starters in 2023. I think they'll both play a lot in 22. But outside of that, it's kind of hard. I mean, none of these guys have played a ton. I think we heard a lot of positive things from the previous staff about like a Jonathan Dennis or a Marcus Harper, or I think Jalen Jeffers was a player who was really coming on late last season and kind of forced his way up as one of the top backup tackles. But like none of those guys really played, and there were injuries for Dennis, missed the whole year, and I think Harper had something as well. So I actually do think this is a position of need, and I wouldn't be totally stunned to see them really prioritize it this class. And I think Adrian Clem, by all accounts, really good recruiter. It's going to be a big year for him in 23. It'd be huge for him to finish 22 by landing Connerly, by the way. I mean, that would be about as good as it gets. And I saw someone post this on the message board, kind of interesting. Just like if Jim Harbaugh does leave Michigan, Michigan's considered a favorite, one of the favorites for Connerly. Maybe that opens the door more for Oregon. But no, I think this is a priority, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's a position you see addressed as well through the portal going into the 23 season. I think you're obviously set now. I don't think it's with your scholarship math we talked about earlier. I don't think there's any value of going and adding a portal player for 2022 unless that player is just awesome. But for 23 and beyond, I think off the top of my head, it's like I feel like I know who maybe two starters for 23 are, but the rest of it is pretty unproven to me.
I think you could make an argument that they should probably hit the portal or at least one junior college guy for the 2023 class along the O-line.
Mm-hmm.
Like try and find an older player who can be ready to go from a physical standpoint, because football is a developmental sport and the offensive line is a developmental sport position where you need multiple years to get in. I think Dawson Jaramillo is a prime example of that, where I feel like his first 2 or 3 years at Oregon, we looked at him and didn't think he would play. And then this year it was a case of he needs to play more. He needs to play way more than what he got on the field because he was that impactful. And not every guy's like that. Obviously, Penny, Tyrell Crosby, those guys have shown up. Shane Lemieux has shown up and been a starter since day one. That happens, but there's both sides, and so I think you could argue Clem and Lanning and Dillingham should go and get a transfer or two, whether that's JUCO or transfer portal, and have them and guys that have 2 years or more of eligibility. That's where I think it's really important, not just a 1 year stopgap, but a guy that you can go in and say, hey, he's going to be a 2 year starter. I think the impact of Josh Connerly could change the entire scope of the 2023 outlook if he signs with Oregon in March. If he does, I think you look at it and say, wow, you've got a centerpiece of Dawson, Jackson Powers Johnson, and Connerly going into 2023. That's a drastic difference in just one extra person there.
Yeah, offensive line depth is always huge. It's something that we basically haven't worried about in the last couple of years with Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal. It's just kind of like, they'll figure it out. That's their thing. That's their bread and butter. They're going to get a good offensive line recruit, and happened every year. Whether those panned out, they didn't. So happens. But they still loaded up Oregon's depth. And you can look at the depth right now, and you would have a second starting five with their depth. You have Bram Walden, Jalen Jeffers as tackles. You can do Harper, Powers Johnson, Jonathan Dennis, Dawson. You have depth that's there. However, like Eric mentioned, most of these guys are unproven. They haven't played at all. And so for Adrian Clem and this new staff, getting offensive line depth is incredibly important, because it's easy for 1 to 2 guys to go down on the offensive line. You saw that this entire past season where, I was calling Alex Forsythe, Jake Hansen. Matt screwed me up with the Shane Lemieux reference right there. Forsythe goes down for weeks, and Ryan Watt just slides right in, does fine. No issues there. You move or you shuffle around the rotation. You go to TJ Bass, the left tackle, and the offense flourishes really in the ground attack. But I think it's a position where you always need to have depth, because the probability of injuries is just way too high for offensive linemen. And with the depth that they have right now is really great, because they get another year learning from a couple multi-year starters on the offensive line. When it comes to game time situations, I think they need to get, like Matt was saying, a JUCO guy where he could be an immediate plug and play dude, or he could sit a year and still has another year of eligibility. So yeah, the 2023 class is going to be really imperative for Adrian Clem to really, earn his paycheck and go out and recruit a bunch of these offensive linemen that come through the West Coast basically every year. Connerly is an interesting one too. We have no idea. He's waiting until, May, until he's signing. After the National Signing Day period, he's pulling a JTT in the last cycle, another kid out of Seattle, Washington, who can't make a decision before the timeline. So I think that's kind of funny. But with Harbaugh, that does open up a door for Oregon if he chooses to go coach in the NFL again. He had an interview with the Vikings, or at least they requested to interview him this past weekend. That also opens the door for Washington to come in, because if he's not going to Michigan, he's probably going to stay on the West Coast. And that also opens the door for USC to come in and try to get his talent. So it's surely not a sure thing that if Harbaugh were to leave, he would come to Oregon. I think they have a good chance. I also think Washington has a good chance. It's hometown school. I think USC has a good chance. But building offensive line depth from here on out is really important. It always will be, I think, in football. I think you build through the trenches first, then you go find everybody else. I think it's harder to find elite trench talent than it is anywhere else.
Yeah.
I will be interested to see what this new coaching staff's bread and butter is. I mentioned that Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal, that their bread and butter, offensive line, I always got those guys. I'm not sure what it'll be for this staff. Just basics, I'd say defensive line or outside linebacker type guys with Lanning and Tosh Lupoy. Kenny Dillingham seems to have quite a way of words around quarterbacks. So that might be something that Oregon performs well on. It'll all just be kind of fun. But, yeah, to answer the question, build up your offensive line depth. That's all.
You took my tangent. I was going to go off on about identity of the program and how that was shifting. So good on you. I was thinking the exact same thing about no,
mind.
We haven't really had to address that, but you kind of think about it of like, yeah, under Mario, you just kind of figured the O-line was going to be good. It was going to be fine. And I'm not saying
every year, just it's going to be fine. No worries.
Kind of pencil them in as being one of the better groups and move on. And I'm not saying that's going to be totally different under Clem, but it's a different identity from a staff perspective when you have a defensive coach as opposed to one of the more accomplished offensive line coaches in the country. Are we going to finish it up here with a question from one of my favorite question askers, and that's at Duck for Quacks. He asks he's got a two-part question because, of course, he asks, with the women's basketball and men's basketball turning the corner, becoming likelier tournament teams, which team do you think will make it further? And then one for Matt. Also, Matt, how close will you be following the construction of the new Jake complex? And he uses two hashtags. First, he uses hashtag Odds and Audibles, and then he
We're going to adopt this one here. We're going to use this.
Okay, Golfs and Golfables is the second hashtag from Bill.
No offense, it's so bad, it's awesome.
No, it's exactly what it is. Like I read it 3 times of like, okay, that's something I would never have thought of, but it's like kind of perfect. So, and as Matt and Jared are big golfers, by the way, I'm going to start trying to become a little bit of a golfer here in the next couple of weeks. To join them on the
potentially league. This week we'll have all the updates on Oregon Ducks at 24/7 Sports on our YouTube page. So everybody critique Eric's swing, please.
No, please don't. I do not golf. To the first part, and then we'll jump into some golf talk for Matt to close, because we know that's a big.
We have to include Jared in this discussion. Jared is as much of a golfer as I am.
That's true. You guys can talk. Yeah. You guys can you can have your own spin-off golf and gospel podcast. I think right now the women's team are going to have a better seed, so I would pick them. I mean, they're currently kind of in the 3 to 4 seed range, and I think the men are. Yeah, I was going to say they're like kind of fringe-ish. The women have. It's funny because the men and women have had kind of a similar. I know the men lost to Colorado at home, and that was considered a bad loss, but like both these teams have been pretty hot of late and have been pretty impressive. I just think it's the depth of the conference in the Pac-12. Like I think it was slept on. Oregon beat Utah on Wednesday of this week, the women's team. Utah was 18th in the net ranking coming into that game. Like that was a big win. That was a quad 1 top 20 net ranking victory. On the men's side, there aren't you've got 3 teams that are basically going to be resume builders in the conference right now. Yeah. And that's UCLA and USC, who Oregon has beaten twice. And that's why they're kind of where they are. And then it's Arizona. Every other win can almost be, I won't say detracting from things, but like
it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt, but it doesn't help.
Yeah, beating Oregon State at home isn't moving the needle this year. But beating a Utah team, even beating USC, who was a top 60 team, is more impactful than Oregon men beating Oregon State, who you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was like a quad 2, quad 3. I mean, it wasn't a particular. I mean, they were 3-17. So I think just. I'm not going to speak to who's playing hotter in March because I won't bet against Dana Altman because he's proven to do really well there. I also won't bet against Kelly Graves because he's proven really well in tournament settings. But the women will have a head start in terms of seeding. I actually, at this point, am kind of anticipating that they'll host, which is a big advantage. So I think they'll get out of that. I think they'll be at least in the Sweet 16 this year. I'm pretty confident with that, with the way they're playing, or at least they'll be positioned. The men are going to have to kind of fight and scratch their way to the finish line.
The men have 2 quad 3 losses this season, and they've actually both come at home, which makes them even worse. Arizona State, and then they also lost most recently to Colorado, which was a quad 3 loss. They will have an opportunity. They will have 2 opportunities to get wins against Washington State. While we've been recording this show, they've announced on February 14th, the Ducks will play Washington State at 6 p.m. at Matt Nat Arena. That's a makeup game from a couple weeks ago. And then they'll end the season at Washington State. And obviously things will change a lot here in the next 6 weeks or so. But Washington State is currently 38th in the net. They were 52 yesterday. But by getting that win against Colorado this past weekend, for whatever reason, along with the rest of college basketball, they saw a pretty big jump. So you have an opportunity for another top 40 team. But Eric kind of played it out perfectly. Like, the only other way Oregon can really enhance their seed right now is they've got 3 games outside of Washington State that will drastically impact it. At Arizona, which is currently number 3 in the net rankings, that game is in 3 weeks. And then you have home games in 4 weeks against number 10 UCLA in the net. And then you also have a game against Southern California, who's 26th in the net. Honestly, if you want to ensure that you get into the tournament and you're cut clear and dry before Vegas even starts, you got to go undefeated. And it's possible. You do that. You go undefeated in the regular season to close things out. You're in the tournament. No questions asked. You will have a seed. You'll probably be like an 8, or not an 8, but more like a 9, 10, or an 11 seed if you go undefeated. And then if you win a couple games, you can maybe move up a little bit. But every game you drop, you're going to drop down another seed level. And Oregon right now is 12th, or they're the last team out, or they're the first team out of the tournament. I can't talk today. So I would automatically pick Oregon, the women's side. Like you said, like they may host a game. And shoot, it wouldn't surprise me, Eric, if you know this better than I do. It wouldn't surprise me if they find a way to win the league and somehow maybe put themselves into a 2-seed discussion.
I was just thinking, and we'll get to Jerry on your pick on this, and then we can go into the golf and Gotsabals to finish. But I'm just going to keep saying that as many times. But no, I was thinking about that today. If this is a huge week for the women's program, because if they beat Arizona on the road on Friday, and that's one of the biggest games in the whole season because it's on the road. Honestly, it's probably the biggest game from a movement perspective they have. They win that game. I think they securely put them in a position, because they're currently only 1 game out of Stanford and for the Pac-12 lead. That would put them in a spot to really make that game against Stanford at home here in a couple of weeks for the conference championship potentially. Stanford's been really, really good. I think that's going to be a tough game. We're going to have to play almost perfect to win. But yeah, you're right. I mean, they have a shot to win the conference. And even if they don't win the conference, because the Pac-12 is considered one of the 2 best conferences in the country, they have an opportunity by even being in the discussion there to be a top 3 seed, top 2 seed. I think a 1 seed is off the table. There are a couple teams, from other conferences. Stanford, I think, is pretty locked in there. But you look at NC State, you look at South Carolina, I think those teams are going to be hard to move off the 1 line. But Oregon has a shot to be a 2 seed or a 3 seed, which is crazy because we were saying a couple weeks ago it was like, the ceiling's probably 4. I think they've kind of played themselves up enough where you can have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the women's team is the easy pick here. They just have the most potential. Now that they have like their big 4, I would say, now that they're all back and healthy, you saw it against USC, where if they start to hit shots from the perimeter and Yara Sabali is doing her thing, they're a really hard team to beat. They have some rebounding issues, but that's another thing. And for the men's team, both these teams played just so poorly in the beginning of the season that even though they're both finding their grooves right now, it's only really helping the women's team just because of how putrid the Pac-12 has been in men's basketball outside of the top 4 people, which stinks because this was a season where, the Pac-12 might kind of be good. Oregon State's coming off a deep tournament run, and they've really struggled, to say the least. Arizona State is non-existent. Arizona has been a huge surprise. I don't think any of them really had, Arizona moving up to like a top 5, top 10 team in the country in the preseason rankings. UCLA has obviously been solid, but you have teams like Washington State or Colorado, who kind of had a little bit of preseason buzz. It's like, well, they could be a contender, not for the Pac-12, but, just a team that might be able to make the tournament, something like that. And both of those teams have kind of fallen flat on their face. And Washington, as much as people who listen to this podcast might not like hearing this, that's a pretty large name brand team. And they've been virtually non-existent in postseason play for the last few years. And once again, that's where they are this year. So that doesn't help the overall image of the Pac-12. It doesn't help Oregon when they beat them by a million points, the other week. It's a much harder road for the men's team to really, turn a corner here and make a big impact on their seeding in the tournament. Matt outlined the 2 Los Angeles games at home and then the game at Arizona. Oregon's already 2-0 against UCLA and USC. But those are 2 really talented teams. That was UCLA and USC, without fans. This will be with fans, obviously, but it'll be at Matthew Knight. And for Oregon, for the men's team, they're more inconsistent in play than the women's team of recent. They've both been very consistent. They've both been good, but I've had more confidence in going to a women's game where Eric and I are sitting there and it's like, well, this should probably be a blowout. And then that actually happening on the court, where in the men's game, when I go with Matt, this should probably be a blowout, but it might be like a 4-point game with 30 seconds to play and we'll all be at the edge of our seats type of deal. So that's kind of where I see it. It's good that they're both hitting their strides, though. I do think that both teams will somehow, some way sneak into the tournament, mostly the men's team in somehow, some way.
I agree. I think both will get in.
Yeah.
Oregon, I think this is how I envision things playing out. I think Oregon's women's team will actually end up being a 3 seed and will be kind of a popular dark horse candidate to make the Final Four out of in their field.
I think so.
I think they're really good. I've watched a couple of their last couple games now that they've been fully healthy, and I don't watch every single game, but the ones that I've watched the last 3 or 4 that they've played now that they've been fully healthy, and I go back and watch the games at the beginning of the year, they are night and day better. They are playing like what we all expected them to be, which was a top 10 team that could make the Final Four. I think it's crazy to think about how we were both programs were kind of down a little bit in November, and there was concern for both of what's happening with this team. And the women, they have flown sneakily under the radar. I don't think people realize how good they are. Like Eric mentioned, that Utah team that they played was high in the net rankings. I think the Utes had like 4 or 5 losses going into that game, and they had no business really hanging with, from a pure talent perspective, with Oregon. Oregon's women's team is really, really good. I think the men, they close out. They have a road game this week starting at Colorado on Thursday. That's not a must win. But the Utah one on Saturday is. If they lose that, that probably does them in for an at-large bid. But you should win that game, and then you come back and you play a Stanford team that's got a lot of good quad 1 and quad 2 wins under their belt. They've beaten Oregon already. You play Cal, then you play Washington State, and then you go on the road. I think the Arizona schools, don't need to go through the whole schedule here, but I think Oregon's going to do enough where they're going into Vegas where they're looked at as maybe a 10 seed. And I think maybe best case scenario, they're going to be more like a best case 8 seed with the ability to play up to maybe a 6. Or worst case scenario, they're going into Vegas as a 10 seed, and they can maybe drop a game and end up playing in the playing game.
All right, ready to do some golf talk, guys?
Let's do it.
Always.
I'm going to let you guys take this away because I don't even know what the Jake is. So
So the University of Oregon on Monday announced they are breaking ground at Emerald Valley Golf Course in Crestwell.
Shout out Zach Neal, Duckswire.
That's right. He works there. They are building a golf facility named after Peter and Jan Jacobson. Peter is obviously a very famous golfer from the University of Oregon. And it's going to be a state-of-the-art practice facility, teaching facility. The men and the women's golf teams will use it. It'll have all the latest technology in golf. It's going to be weather protected so that the teams can practice there and hang out there all year round, so they can go hit golf balls on the range and be toasty and warm when it's 34 degrees outside everywhere else. Pretty cool deal. 6,000 square foot facility. I think the U of O tweeted out some blueprint graphics of it. They've released a couple of renderings of it. It's a pretty sweet setup. One in which any golfer in this region will be pretty jealous of, that the University of Oregon's athletes will get to use it.
Are we going to start covering golf, by the way?
It's been like a joke of mine. I wanted to do it for a while.
I'm so down. I'll do it. Yeah. This is pretty sweet. It's great to see, other Oregon athletics, get this type of funding. You usually only see it for the basketball programs, the football team, and the track team. But in the golf team, both men's and women's have been pretty darn good over the last few years. We all remember Aaron Wise winning it was a 2016, the NCAA men's individual tournament at Eugene Country Club, which was pretty dope. And he's now in the PGA. This is a step forward. This is a good thing. Emerald Valley is a nice country club as well, not too far from campus. But the golf program, they deserve a type of environment like this. And with Oregon and the resources that they have and the allocations that they can provide, this is a great step up for them. It's going to attract a lot of golf recruits here. This is despite the weather, this is an area of the country where you can theoretically play year round. And that should, attract enough people to come to Oregon, especially given a little bit of their history and what they can offer a recruit to go out and think about coming to Oregon, and as opposed to going to, one of the Southern California schools or Arizona State. So I think this puts them in contention with that. A lot of cool information about the Jake. That just Oregon released like a press release earlier today about it. Looks state of the art. It's exactly what you need in golf nowadays with all the advanced analytics and numbers that people will throw at you. It looks like they're ready to do that and ready to start getting ready.
That's the questions, folks.
We cover it all here.
Always.
We really do. This is probably the largest
breadth
of
no
discussion.
Baseball questions again. This is tough. Come on,
All
people.
Right. Jared,
not baseball season yet, Jared.
Jared, I'll use my burner account to ask a baseball question next week. How's that sound?
We're not
Which one of your burner accounts?
All these questions are from our burners. Come on. You're not supposed to release that information.
No wonder Ducks for Quacks is your favorite, Eric.
All right, that's going to do it for us here on the Odds and Audibles podcast. And thank you for everyone everyone that did submit a question was a real live human being. They sent those questions in. We appreciate it. And until we come back with you later this week, probably with a signing day recap or maybe a preview, we'll figure that out here off air. And until then, you've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.